In the book of 2 Timothy, the second chapter, beginning in verse 19, going on down through verse 22. 2 Timothy 2, verse 19 through 22. He says, "Nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are his. Let everyone that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. But in a great house there are only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and earth, and some to honor, some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these things, he shall be a vessel unto honor and sanctified, meet for the master's use, prepared unto every good work. Flee also youthful lust, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace, with them that call on the name out of a pure heart." You know, you look at that and you think about what the apostle is saying about the fact that there is a foundation. And we realize the need, the benefit of a strong, a firm foundation, that we can stand, that we can be firm, that we can avoid those things that will fight to push us aside. He also warns about the danger of youthful lust. Now, whenever you look to this lesson, you think about youthful lust, but I got news for you. Age really doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. The dangers that face us, they may have particulars for various ages, but they're really throughout life. The devil is after us in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8. And so he's seeking to get us. There are things that brought forth to us, that seek to pull us aside. And we need to be wary, because the devil is there, no matter when, no matter where, seeking to devour us. So we're sober, we're vigilant in doing those things. But God has also given us the ability that whatever it is that faces us, that we can be overcomers instead of overcome with those things. You know, you think about the Lord as he continues on here. He talks about the fact that we have this ability to stand, to avoid, but he gives us in other passages the powers that we have to stand against all of the wiles of the devil, to overcome. So you look at that and you think, okay, now you're talking about this, but what has love got to do with this? Love is something that is central to everything in our life. There is the love we have. Some people have a love of life. Some people have a love for others. Some people love their work. Some people love this, love that. Love is central, but it's also central to the life we live in service to God. Whenever the first and second commandments were given forth, the greatest commandment, love the Lord thy God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. That tells you how love encompasses everything in my life. But whenever you think about love, as far as really, mostly young folk, I've got a couple of grandchildren that are married. I've got others that are coming up. I look out and I see young folk, they're going to face the temptations of love, the fact of love that comes into the life. And you look and you think that we need to realize that love isn't always what it seems in our mind. So we've got to be open to what God says about it. And you see misguided love throughout our society. And all you have to do is open your eyes and look at the idea of what love is counted as in society to make us aware, well, I better make sure what I'm talking about. And we're going to focus mainly on relationships one with another. But you think about in our society, marriage. I read here a while back that the divorce rate was going down. But then I also read the reason partly for that was the marriage rate was going down. People were just living together. So they didn't have to divorce because they never got married in the first place. So marriage is seen so many times as just an option. And so already this idea of love and unity is perverted. You find the idea of love as it brings about so many actions between individuals. How many do you know through various means that have ended up, a girl's pregnant, young man's a daddy, and they're not old enough to even comprehend what that means. But because of a misguided love, they entered into a relationship that shouldn't have been. You think about the rise of abortion, the rise of infectious diseases. You think about the idea of the mental association, the mental baggage that comes with all the things that young people seem to face. But again, it's not just young. You find people of all ages that face tragedies because of a misguided idea. They think about the idea that love and the relationship that God talks about that goes with it. It's just part of growing up. Not really. That type of love and the actions that go with it are part of being grown up. You know, it's not something that is there for a child to play with. And I realized that, you know, when I was growing up, I guarantee you, I never thought I was a child. Well, if you asked my parents, they would have said probably once about the time I reached 8, I thought I was grown up and I knew everything. But I looked, and whenever I became a teenager, I didn't have any need to have anybody tell me anything, because I knew everything. And I didn't realize till quite a bit later that being grown up had a lot of things that came with it. But you look at society, and they simply have not been able to grasp this. And so you see all of these problems that are there in society. People look and they say, what in the world's happened to the world? Well, the world happened to it instead of God. But if you look and you see in the scriptures, you find true love. In the book of 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, in verse 16 and 17, you know, God's word is inspired. It gives you and I everything we need to be complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. 2 Peter 1 and verse 3, we have all things that pertain to life and godliness. Colossians 3 and verse 17, we have a guidebook for what we do in His name. And so our life is there, and that includes our relationships. Sometimes people look at the Bible and they say, well, that's a guidebook for church. You know, as we spoke of this morning, you know, various aspects of the church. No, we are the church. We are God's children. And we are the ones who should have this concern for what it is that true love means. We're going to look and we're going to see that actually love will not involve itself in the things that we've spoken of. The idea of an optional marriage, premarital sex, all these things, those aren't encompassed in love. They're in spite of true love. But that's the problem. People are enamored by what they call love, and it's not love at all. But if you're going to have true love, if you're going to have that love which is true and based on God's word, you're going to have things that promote good and godly actions. Now, how is it that we're going to have a proper love and live in a relationship, no matter what age, but in all honesty, you young folk, it's going to get you. You're going to be with people, and if you're a female, you're going to have this young man over here who's going to look you in the eye and say, well, I love you. And you're going to look back and say, well, I love you too. And neither one may have any comprehension of what that really means, what that entails. But if you're going to have true love, there are several things that are going to have to be there. For example, if there's going to be a true love, if you're going to control this thing that comes out in our life, these longings within, these feelings within, and it's going to be love, you're going to have a proper concern. This love isn't there. It is fashioned, it is molded, it is guided by a concern. In the book of 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, the Apostle Paul says in verse 9 and 10, wherefore we labor that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of Him. I love you. What are we going to do? What's this going to do with my relationship to God? That's concern that is there. I want to be accepted of God. Oh, I want this girl to love me back. Well, that's good. It's what life's all about, forming relationships and different things. But what's going to be acceptable with God? And if that relationship isn't patterned after that, then I've got the wrong concern, that we may be accepted of Him. We're going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that I'm going to receive the things done in my body according to what I've done, whether good or bad. So I want to do good. And that means my relationship that I'm going to say, I love you, so here's our actions between one another. What does it mean about my relationship to God? That's a primary concern. Yeah, I realize that, I love God, but I realize too that doesn't mean that I can't fall. I can think, well, I love God. I'm a Christian now. I've been a Christian for several years, and if you're older, I've been a long, I need to take heed. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12, one of the most important verses in the Bible. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. It can happen to me. So my concern is now with my relationship with God. I want this relationship here, but remember, I as a Christian, I'm going to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. In the book of Matthew, he says, if you love even your family more than me, you're not worthy of me. You love your family, but whenever you become a child of God, you're his child. He is your father. And so your concern is that relationship with him and the concern about losing it. And so then I have this concern. Okay, I've got this relationship. I love her. She loves me. So what's our relationship going to be like? And so I'm concerned with God. So what does God say? What has he said about this? And I go back to the very beginning in Genesis 2 and verse 24, where it talks about the man and the woman, that they are joined together. And that is the union. That is the place. We've been dating a long time. Good for you. I hope you're asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of investigation, but you're not married. And in Hebrews, the 13th chapter, in verse 4, it is the marriage bed that is undefiled. Before that, you're fracturing that relationship that you said you had concern about with God. And so I put that concern there that God is in the forefront. And I want to look, and in these actions, I also want to be concerned with that other person. I have concern with them and their relationship with God. So I, as a young man, I'm in love with this girl. It may turn out I'm more in lust with this girl than I am in love. And there are desires, as we've already noted, fulfilled only in one place, in the marriage bond. The temptations are there. And so I try to promote things, try to engage in things. But I realize if I've got a proper concern, I'm not only now endangering my relationship with God. In the book of Matthew, the 18th chapter, it talks about the fact how horrible it is that if I cause another to stumble, if I'm the cause of that one engaging in things that are not true love. But if I wear them down, it would be better for me to have a millstone cast about my neck and cast into the sea than to do that very thing. I mean, that's a horrific description. I've told you, I grew up with asthma. I used to have to be taken to the doctor to get shots where I could breathe. And, it's just a horrible thing to wonder if you're going to get another breath. I can't imagine being underwater and going down, no way to get back up. And the horror of knowing you'll never get another breath. But that's the description God gives if I cause others to stumble. So I'm going to have a proper concern for the one that I am with, not just myself and my relationship with God, but now with them and their relationship with God. But I'm going to have concern for myself as to who I am. Now, I began this with the precept that you're a Christian. And if not, you need to consider it. You need to look at your life and say, where am I going? What is my, don't get this idea, well, I'm young, I got plenty of time. I can tell you many young people who haven't lived on, but saddest thing, too, is maybe they hardened themselves and never even considered their relationship with God. But you've considered that. I think that's who I'm talking to. And do you realize that when you became a Christian, I spoke of Galatians 3:26 and 27. Do you know you're a child of God? I mean, that is just so amazing. I look at the family relationship as it should be. And I've told you before, I was brought up that you take pride in the fact that you're Williams. That's an important thing. And you realize how important that is, how much your parents have loved you and encouraged you and helped you to get you to this point in life. Do you realize how much they love you? As a child of God, stand in front of the mirror and read John 3:16, and as I've said over and over, personalize it. You look at that, you look down, you look in the mirror, and you read John 3:16. God so loved you, Jack, that he gave his son. And you just stand in awe whenever you contemplate that. Go over and read the crucifixion. Then if you really want to wake up, go read a medical definition of what crucifixion did to our Savior. Read about the agony that he went through before the cross and then in the cross. Whenever he's praying, you look at all of that and you think, how could he ever do that? And then you look back in the mirror. He did that for me. And then you go over to 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, and beginning reading in verse 9, you look at all these things that if you do those, and the interaction, the sinful interaction, sexual reactions between people, it is not proper, you're lost. But he says, here's the difference. You're not going to engage in those because you are bought with a price. My wife just bought a new car here a few months ago. And I looked at that, and it sits in the garage. She's afraid to drive it. And I don't blame her. First house I bought didn't cost as much as that car. That is something. We look and we see things in the world that you put a price on. But all of those things pale whenever you put a price on your soul. There's no greater gift that could ever be given, no greater price that could be paid than the Son of God himself for you and I. And in 1 Corinthians 6, he says, you remember that. And it keeps you from transgressing against God in these sins. So you have these concerns, and you weigh them in the balance of what God says about what it is that's right, what's your relationship with him, the dangers that are there, the danger you can pose to another, and then how can I do that to the one who gave his all? But then also you go on and you think about the commitment. Love is a commitment. And whenever you do get to the point, whenever it is, and you want to enter into marriage, it's a commitment. It is something that, people say, marriage is made in heaven and, it takes, 50-50. No, it doesn't. It takes 100-100. I guarantee you, if you don't give it your all, the marriage isn't going to be as it should be. But you look, and that commitment pales in the commitment I made to God. We talk about Jesus dying for me. I recognize that. You know what happened to me when I obeyed the gospel? I became a child of God. I died. You say, no, you didn't. You're standing right there. No. Galatians 2 and verse 20, I'm crucified with Christ. Romans the 6th chapter. That old man of sin, that one I was before, is put to death. I rose, a new creature in Christ, he says in another passage, but he says here, you rose, Jack, to walk in the newness of life. You made a commitment to God that you're going to stay with him, you're going to do and follow his will. You stand and those things are made. I promise this. Have you ever had somebody come to you, you made a commitment to do something and you failed? Sadly, our failures sometimes become reality. We can overload ourselves. God can't. And God says, your commitment to me, you can't overload it. You can do it. You can do all things through Christ. But the fact is, sometimes we fail to look and to think about that commitment whenever these temptations come. You go back to the book of Genesis, the 39th chapter, and you read about this young man named Joseph. A lot of providential events happened to get him into this household. And he was, besides the owner of the house himself, he was second unto that. But this man had a beautiful wife. And she looked to this young man. Come here. Come lay with me. He said, no. She kept tempting him. And what his response was, how can I commit this great sin? Not only, we talked about our impact on others. He said, how can I do that to this one who has entrusted me with so much? But how can I sin against God? Now you realize what that temptation was. Here's a beautiful older woman, and here's a young man. Hormones very much alike. Just because they're a Bible character doesn't mean they're not human. He's tempted. Finally, she reaches out and she grabs him, and he runs and leaves his coat behind. He knew he had to flee from fornication, but the reason that he did it is because of the commitment that he had with God. I made this commitment. I promised God I'm not going to do this. And so you got to have this commitment to God and understand what it is, that it isn't just God promised to save me, but I promise to live for Him. Whether I eat, drink, whatever I do, I'm going to do unto the glory of God. But then also realize that I should make a commitment by myself or towards myself. Remember Galatians 2 and verse 20, the Apostle Paul looking at himself? He said, I am crucified. That's my choice. I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but the life that I now live in the flesh. Here's my commitment. I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And in the Corinthian letter, he says, I keep under my body. I buffet myself daily, lest whenever I save others, I myself will be cast away. In other words, I made a commitment, and I'm going to stay with it. Whenever Job was challenged, and he was told, all the things that are happening to you are happening because you had some impropriety with a maid. Remember, I told you there's not an age limit on this. Job's a married man, has grown children, and yet they know that that's a possibility with him. His friends charged him wrongly. Job's response was, this older man, he said, I made a covenant with mine eyes. He said, I made a decision myself. He knew he could be tempted. He knew that was a possibility. Let him that thinketh he standeth, think he lest he fall. So I made a covenant with mine. I'm not even going to look upon her. Now that doesn't mean if there are women walking around and all of a sudden he does like that. But if he caught himself looking at a woman and his thoughts might go beyond the fact, she's a beautiful woman. I can tell my wife that I saw a woman today and she's beautiful. I always follow it up as a smart man does, not near as beautiful as you. But the reality is, if it goes beyond that, you get out of there. You made a covenant. You're not going to enter into that. So what you do is you make this commitment that you're going to do the things that prevent you from falling into that sin. So it's commitment. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to engage in those things that lead down that pathway to take me where they're charging me with. I've known people who've been charged a lot of things, and they said, that wasn't even possible. Why not? Because I didn't do that. I didn't even look upon that maid, is what Job said. But then you also have to have just common sense. The common sense is to recognize that these things lead to others, so you don't start that slope. That's what Job did. He was using common sense. He says, I know what can happen. So in Job 31:1, he says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I look upon a maid? Proverbs 4 and verse 23, keep your heart with all diligence. Out of it are the issues of life. Well, what does that mean? It means that there are things that lead to sin. Looking upon one in the wrong way, male or female, you can look and the thoughts begin to go, I'm out of here. But you look at it and you realize that there are a lot of things that do that. Galatians, the 5th chapter, we could go over and just do a study there in verse 19 and following of the works of the flesh. But you just pick lasciviousness. Jude talks about people turning the grace of God into lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is just lack of restraint. No laws. Just kind of do what you want. I've done studies before and we've talked about, dancing. People say, oh, you're old-fashioned. Yeah, I'm pretty old-fashioned. Old-fashioned. That's me. I grew up in a time in which dancing was popular. Not necessarily the kind that goes on a lot of times now, but it was more of dancing together. But then it evolved to the idea of, you're apart and you're doing all these things. But you know what all of those had in common? Was the movements that were sexual. They were meant not to say, oh, do you see how athletic I am? They were meant more to entice the idea of my sexuality. And the dancing together, the holding each other. People say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Let me ask you this. If you as a parent came home and here are your children holding and no music's playing, what would you do? I'd probably have to leave for a moment to calm down. But I wouldn't say, oh, that's okay, they're just dancing. Somehow you turn on the music and these movements and everything and the touching, it gets okay. But whether it's that or not, the whole idea in society today is things are sexual in nature. It's what makes advertising go round. That's what makes the idea of what I bring forth in the way that I dress, the way I act. I want to be attractive. Nothing wrong with being attractive. But it can go beyond the bounds of propriety as far as a child of God would say. And that's what the works of the flesh are. These things lead to other actions. I remember years ago, my son will remember it, he was probably 12, 13 years old, I don't know. And he wanted to go skiing. So we went up to Snow Creek. Mistake one, I went skiing. I'd never been on skis. But we went up, and to top it all off, it was a little warm, so it wasn't soft snow. It was kind of crunchy, icy. And in all honesty, it wouldn't have made any difference with me. Jared, of course, is a young, athletic boy. He did fine. Just sit. Me, I'm struggling along. But he had one ski that kept coming off. We go down this hill. You can go to the right, and I don't remember what color it was, but to the left, there was a black diamond. I didn't know for sure what that meant at the time, but I knew it was something they said stay away from. My son goes down. For some reason, he veers left. He's right at the top. As far as I could tell, it was a cliff. He falls down, the skis off. And I'm sitting there at the top watching him. He can't get it off. I thought, okay. I go down, and I'm doing everything I can to go slow. I sit on the ground beside him. We get his ski on. He looks, he sees the black diamond thing, and he said, Dad, what are we going to do? I said, can't go back up. You see, we'd committed ourselves. It was his foolishness at first that committed us, I will admit that. But I followed right after him. But it was a whole lot easier going down to that point than it was trying to get back up. Well, the end of the story is we're just going to have to go down. He did it no trouble. I did it doing acrobatics that nobody in the realms of time have ever seen since. But I don't think my hip has ever recovered from that. But the point was, once we got started down, going back was nigh unto impossible. Sometimes we enter into things. Maybe on a date, I'm a big proponent of not going on a date where you're going to be alone. Because you're there in a place, this love goes into action. You kiss, you hug. One thing can lead to another. And once the ball starts rolling, it's harder to stop. You see, you need the common sense not to get down that slope to begin with. Don't start down it. Stay in the safe area. It may be dating, may be who you're with, may be where you go, may be the action that you're going to. You know, well, yeah, they're doing this, but I'm not going to get involved in that. Yeah, that's famous last words of a lot of people. So you make a decision beforehand. You have the common sense that you're going to now avoid these situations. And then you have the common sense to avoid how foolish excuses can be. I love you. No, this is wrong. We shouldn't do it. But we love each other. No, you don't. Common sense dictates, no, that's not right. You're not acting upon love, you're acting upon lust. In the book of Proverbs, the 7th chapter, you find, beginning in verse 6, going on down through verse 23, but it's the dangers of being drawn into relationships that are wrong. And in the latter part, it says, with her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. And with flattering lips, she forced him. In other words, here's this guy, and she's sitting there batting her eyes at him, smiling and giving these little looks, and yeah, here I go. And it depicts it clearly. He goeth after her straightway as an ox goes to the slaughter, or a fool to the correction of the stocks. But the problem was, he mistook this flattering of lips, the things that are there, he mistook it for love. It was just lust. It was passion aroused by those things that you ought to know. But why did I do that? Well, because you didn't use the common sense to reject those things. What you should have done, Jack, was to look and say, this is true love. True love, whenever you look and hear you're with somebody and they say, oh, I love you. God understands we love each other, so it's got to be all right. No, God understands that love, in Romans the 12th chapter in verse 9, or Romans the 13th chapter, rather, in verse 8 through 10, owe no man anything but to love one another. In other words, here's this one thing. Owe is a word, it means a continuing action. You never enter into anything that you cannot pay that off. That's good financial sense, but here he's putting it in the spiritual realm. He says, now the only thing that you do, that you keep on owing and everything, that you never pay off, is to love one another. That never stops. But this love is far different, because he says, he that loveth another has fulfilled the law. And then he points out, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. If there be any other commandment, it's briefly comprehended in this saying, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. True love is not going to engage in things that are harmful, because love worketh no ill. But whenever you say, oh, I love you, and you do it, you just transgress the law and convince somebody else to do it. That's not love. That's lust. And that's what's wrong with the world. We can't let it be wrong with us. And so I'm going to have the common sense that I'm not going to be persuaded by false love. We all have desires. God knew that. He told those in Corinth, he said, if you can't contain, you marry. You don't go out and fulfill your desire. The desires are there, but there's only one realm it can be fulfilled in. And true love will mandate that that's the only thing you're going to do. You're not going to engage in these things that are wrong. But you look at all that and you say, well, this is hard, and that's why you have to have courage. It's not hard to live as the world. That's why it's called a broad way. But you have courage. Romans the 12th chapter, verse 1 and 2. He emphasizes that we're not like the world. We present our bodies to God. But he says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. That ain't easy. Because the world presses in. Everybody else says, well, you're just this way. And you say, yeah, I am. The courage to say, yeah, that's me. I don't do those things. I don't engage in those things. But I've got to have the courage to not go with the crowd. Too many people, they follow the leader and they don't look at the leader. The leader is ungodly and looking for ungodly things, and they look and say everybody else is doing it. You have to have the courage to say, I don't care. I'm not going to. That's not who I am, and that's not whose I am. And then you have to have the courage to seek true beauty. There are a couple of passages in the Bible. In Proverbs, the 7th chapter, and verse 10, it talks again about the warning of the man. You know, you got to be careful. And I think God does that because men are so foolish. They fall for anything, it seems like we will. So he says, you watch out. But there was one that was there, attired as a harlot. You realize what that says. That means you can dress in such a way that what people see is sexual. There's nothing wrong with being attractive. But if my dress, male or female, is meant to be a sexual attraction, that's not good. You say, well, no. The other passage is in 2 Timothy the 2nd chapter, verse 9 through 10. It talks about wearing yourself in modest apparel, shamefaced. And somebody said, well, modest. No. You look, you can get into the amount of dress and such as that. But what he's talking about is remember, you've made a decision as to who you are, whose you are, the value you are. And now, what are you going to show people? Matthew 5 says, let your light shine. Does that stop whenever I dress or undress? No. Peter talks about that a man is to be converted, not with, and you catch what Paul said and what Peter said, it's not the broiding of the hair, the wearing of the pearls, the gold, and everything. That's not saying you can't wear them, because he also says the wearing of apparel, so he's not saying go around naked. But what he's saying is you don't let that outward take away from the inward. Whenever somebody's attracted to you, it ought to be that you're a good, godly person, male or female. Not, oh, did you see him? Oh, did you see how he is? He pulled his shirt off. He rippled his muscle. What are you doing that for? You want to show her how sexy you are. What about the woman? The young lady. She's going to dress. Don't you wish you could have me? She doesn't really want him to have her. But that's the way the attire shows. So I have a courage. I'm not a slave to the fashion of the world. I'm a slave to the fashion of God, because I realize what in my outward appearance, what I can do and the effect I can have on others. I go on a date with this person, and what I'm wearing can send a message to that person. It may not be what I intend to send. So I need to consider. Young ladies, you might ask your daddy, and your daddies be honest with your young ladies. Young men, ask your mamas, and your mamas be honest with your young men. But you ask, what is it? Is this proper? Is this something that's going to send the wrong message? So I have this courage to look and say, I don't want my outward appearance to distract from who I really am. How many times have you heard of somebody engaging in something, the young man, the young lady, they're going to do that? Well, not that way. What makes you think that? And here's a young man sitting over there, flexing his muscles, got his shirt off, and he's showing off. I have no idea what made her think that. Yeah, I do. And you do too. That's why you're doing that in the first place. So I want to demonstrate, I want my life to shine on who I am and whose I am. And thus I have the courage to say no. I've said before, Genesis 39, Joseph said no, and he ran. Sometimes people say, well, if I'm out someplace, I don't know where to run. Look at the directory. I've said this before, and I mean it wholeheartedly. You give me a call. Me and my wife will come and get you. I don't care where you are, and I don't care what it takes to get you. I will come and get you. You find yourself in a situation to where you try to say no and somebody won't take it, I can line up a whole line to come and get you. But first of all, you have the courage to say no. But the best thing is not to start down that slope. So many times we have to say no to things because we went where we shouldn't be. So you make that decision. And then if you do make a mistake, it's called sin. Have the courage to say, I'm sorry. God, I let you down. Brothers and sisters in Christ, I let you down. Mom, Dad, I let you down. Forgive me. It's called humility. But the proper humility brings forth courage because you're submitting to God. But you look, and all of this comes back to what love is supposedly in this world, but then we learn what true love is, what it does, how to care for it. And we make a decision that, yes, I know that I can be tricked by the one who says to me, girl or boy, I love you. No, that doesn't mean it's true. I was blessed I was a hard-headed boy. I have told one woman in my life that I loved her, aside from mother, sister, and that woman. When I was growing up, I don't know what it was. I'd be out on a date, the girl would say, I love you. And I said, oh, you want to go get a hamburger? But I saw so many that fell into that love was just a little word. I love you. I love you. Oh, we love each other. Do you really know what love is? Are you ready to control that you're now calling love? If it's true love, you'll get it under control. And God's given us a means to do that. A lot of people in the world, they say, well, you can't have any fun if you do that. Yeah, you can. Living like a Christian is fun. But you know one of the greatest aspects, the good, fun things of living like a Christian? You go home at night, you've been out on a date, maybe you've just been out with the guys or the girls or whatever, and you come home at night, you folks say, hey, how'd the evening go? And you tell them, went good. Maybe you don't tell them everything went on or anything. But at night you go home, you go in and you go to bed and you lay down, and the last thought in your mind isn't, I hope nobody finds out what I did. I hope nobody knows. Instead, you thank God for the day you've had, the courage He gave you, the commitment that you had, that you put love for Him first. And if you're truly falling in love with somebody else, thank God that you found somebody that you can love who has a common goal, a common desire, and you're going to help one another to heaven. That's what true love will do. But it begins with a love for God. We love him because he first loved us, 1 John 5, verse 19. So I love him. And whenever I have that commitment to him, I love him, and I say, Lord, what would you have me do? And whenever I read, I'm to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, I say, where's the water? And then based upon that confession I make, I go down to the water and I rise and I walk in the newness of life because I'm a child of God and I'm determined to live that way. And it's good that you have brothers and sisters around to help you. Maybe you've fallen. We're here to help. Whatever your need may be, base it on true love for God and then live with true love for others, including self. We can help you to do that as we stand and sing the song of invitation.